Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. This is Cole and this is my video for the COM 4494 presentation. And in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how to make sourdough bread. This is something that I've done over quarantine, that I've done a handful of times, and because I've had a lot of time on my hands. So it does take about 2 days to do, but there's not all that many steps in the process, and today I'm going to show you what we're doing. So first off, I'm going to show you the tools we're going to need. So you're going to all need access to some all-purpose flour, just regular white bread flour. In this video I'm going to be using some spelt flour as well, just gives it a bit more of a nutty texture and flavor. You're going to need access to some salt, a variety of just different shapes of bowls, just for mixing. This next tool is not fully crucial, but I find it helps a lot, and that's an electric scale. So you can measure your ingredients more accurately, and you don't have to use a measuring cup, that you can just use the weight. A small spatula helps, I find, and that's for the bread making process. And then for the baking and shaping, you're going to need a bowl, or any bowl will work, but this is what they use for bread making, and it's really helpful. Gives it a good texture to the bread as well, and it's called a boule. And then for baking the bread, you're going to want a large Dutch oven. This is an enameled Dutch oven. It's kind of nicer, but if you have anything similar, that'll work as well. There's a method that you can use without a Dutch oven that I'll tell you later. And the most important ingredient you're going to need here is some live sourdough starter. Because we're making a sourdough bread, we're not using a dried yeast. This is the substitute for it, and it's going to give the bread a bit of a funk, and it is actually what makes the bread quite a bit healthier than normal breads. The best way to get some of this is either borrow some of it from a friend, because it is a living thing. You have to constantly feed it, and it grows and goes down. So constantly, as you own sourdough starter, you're feeding it and discarding some. So if you know someone that keeps a starter, they'll be happy to give you some. Otherwise, go to a bakery, and any proper bakery will be happy to give you any amount of sourdough starter, and that really gets you off. You can really start off with only 20 grams, and you can grow it into whatever you need it to be. There is a way to make it from scratch. It just takes a handful of days. It takes about 14 days to constantly feed it, and then discard some, and feed it and discard some, and then it will become living. But the best way I found is just to borrow some from a friend, and then you have it forever. All right, there are roughly about 4 steps to this process. There's going to be the starter, feeding the starter. There's going to be making the dough. There's going to be shaping the dough, and then there's going to be baking the loaf. So right now I'm going to show you what is needed to feed the starter and get it going. So the first thing, you're going to want to grab your electric scale, set it up for grams, grab any small bowl and tare it. All right, and then you're just going to grab your currently living starter. This will be nice and bubbly. It's going to smell like it's got a bit of a funk to it. And then you're just going to pour, right now we'll do about 100 grams into this. So the ratio for feeding starter is you're going to do 1 to 1 to 1. So I'm going to do 100 grams of starter, I'm going to do 100 grams of water, and then I'm going to do 100 grams of flour. So here I'm just adding 100 grams of the living sourdough starter. Alrighty, that's 100 there. And then 100 grams of water. And then I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of all-purpose flour and then our whole wheat flour. And before I do that, I'm just going to give it a bit of a stir so that all the starter is mixed through with the water. Alrighty, now 50 and 50. All right, now you should have 300 grams in your bowl. And just incorporate the flour into the mixture. And then once this is all mixed, you're just gonna add that to a clean jar, and I'll show you the process of what happens to the starter as time goes on. But we have to let this sit for about 4 hours until we use it in the loaf or in the bread. And I'll show you a test to know when it's ready to go. All right, so it's been about 4 hours since we last fed the starter, and this elastic band on the jar here just shows the level on when I fed it. So you can see that it's growing, and when I release the lid, it'll actually go up more with the air introduced. And one test to see if your starter is ready to be used is just called a float test, where you just add a little bit to some water to see if it's ready or not. And if it floats, that means it is ready. And if it sinks, it's not ready yet. It's not active enough. So I just have some plain room temperature water here. I'm gonna add the starter to. And as you can see, the starter is floating. So that means it's ready to go. But before we use that, we need to make something called the autolyse, which I'll show you right now. Okay, so the autolyse is just when you mix the flour and water before and let it sit for about half an hour for the flour to fully hydrate before you mix the rest of the dough. So I'll show you that right now. So all it is, it's gonna be 800 grams of all-purpose flour. So it's going to be 800 of all-purpose, and then we're going to do 200 of this spelt flour. And now after adding the flour to the bowl, we're going to add 800 grams of water. Now you're just going to mix with your hands until the dough or the flour is fully hydrated. Let that sit somewhere covered in a warmish environment for about 30 minutes for the flour to fully hydrate. Now that the autolyse has had time to rest, we're going to add in the starter. So as you can see on the starter, there are lots of bubbles, which is the sign of the fermentation. So we're going to add 200 grams of the starter into the mixture. Now that the starter is mixed in, we're going to add 50 grams of water, which we have 20 grams of salt mixed in. So just add that solution in. And then again, just mix that throughout the flour mixture. All right, now that we have all the ingredients mixed in our dough, now with the salt in there, it's a bit more firm. So what we're going to do is going to pour it out onto a surface, and I'm going to show you guys a technique called the slap and fold. And as you can see, our dough is very wet. That's normal, don't be worried about that. Don't add any flour either at this point. The more we slap and fold this dough, the firmer the texture will be. So what you're going to do for this process, it helps if you get your hands wet. You're just going to pick up the dough from the middle, you're going to slap it back on the table and fold it over on itself. And the more you do this, it's going to develop gluten, and it's going to make the dough nice and firm and give it lots of stretch. Now that we've done the slap and fold technique for a few minutes now, we're going to place it into a container that we can put a lid on, And again, just keep it in a warm environment. And we are going to be doing a series of folds every 15 to 30 minutes that I'll show you in a second. Alright, so I did this one time off camera, but we're going to do this 6 times in total every 30 minutes. We're going to do one fold, and this is going to increase the gluten strength. So we're just going to wet our hands so that the dough doesn't stick to it. Then we're going to pick up our dough, and it should be quite stretchy, and we're going to fold it in on itself. Just pick it up and fold it over. And we already have some air pockets developing, which is good. That means the fermentation's happening. And then we're going to pick it up one more time. We're just going to let it go down on itself. So you're going to do that 6 times in total for 3 hours, and then let it rest for 1 hour. Okay, here's our dough. We have folded it 8 times every 30 minutes, so it's been resting for about 4 hours in total in fermentation. Now we're going to knock it out onto the counter with trying to release as little gas as possible. So you want to make this smooth. And there's the dough. We're going to now divide this into the 2 loaves. So what you can do is you can mark a center line just with some flour so you know where to cut. And then grab your bench scraper and just roughly divide that into 2 loaves. You're going to loosely shape them into circles. Alright, now what we're going to do is transfer it into these bowls. You're going to, if you don't have the specific one for baking bread, you can just use any bowl lined with a cloth, a clean cloth. But so that it doesn't stick to the bowl, we're going to lightly flour the bowl. And then we're going to flour the top of the bread. And once that's floured, we're going to use the bench scraper to release it from the counter, and then we're going to flip it onto its top. Now that we have it flipped, this is the sticky side, so we're going to do some folds in so that it will shape into a ball. So we're going to grab it from the bottom, you're going to stretch it out and fold it on itself. You're going to do the same thing on the sides. And now at the top, you're going to grab it, pull it up, and fold it over on itself. Now that's shaped into a bit of a better shape. We're going to make sure it's nice and floured. And we're going to transfer it in to the bowl with the bottom right now touching the counter is going to be facing up in our bowl. So we're just going to grab the bench scraper and place it in the bowl. And now it's going to sit in here in the fridge for 12 hours or overnight, and then it's going to take shape to the bowl. It's going to do its last fermentation, and then we'll bake it in the morning. Alright, we have the dough out of the fridge that's been resting overnight. The next step is going to preheat the oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. You're going to lightly flour the bottom of the dough and then transfer it onto some parchment paper. So this is what the dough should look like after resting. Now we're going to do a score on the top, which allows the bread to rise in the direction that you cut, and it just gives it a bit of an aesthetic feature as well. So we're just going to take a razor or any really sharp knife and score down the bread. And then those will be revealed a lot more when you bake the bread. Now we're gonna go grab the Dutch oven out of the oven. It's gonna be very hot. And I'm just gonna carefully lower the bread or the dough into the Dutch oven without trying to touch the sides. Perfect. Now we're going to put the lid on and we're going to bake this at 500 degrees with the lid on for 20 minutes. Then we're going to take the lid off and bake for another 20 to 30 minutes. And then we'll have a perfectly cooked loaf of bread. All right, so it's been 20 minutes. It's time to take the lid off. But before that, I was telling you guys earlier about there's a way to do the sourdough without a Dutch oven, and the way you would do that is instead of putting it inside the Dutch oven with the lid on, because that holds the steam in, what you would do is you would put it on a pizza stone, and then underneath the pizza stone in a baking sheet, you would just add some hot water, and so as the first 20 minutes of cooking, it would add the steam, which would allow the bread to rise. But I'm just going to take the lid off now. So as you can see, it's rose quite a bit and it's stretching. Now with the lid off, it's going to start to crisp up the outside of it, and it's going to cook the crumb, which is the hard, crunchy bit on the outside. And here we have the final product. I hope you learned a thing or two about sourdough bread. Thanks for watching my video, and stay safe.